ladies and gentlemen, Stuart Moyse.
Apologies for the microphone. I'm not used to doing assemblies. Sorry. Is anybody misbehaving? First of all, the title is interesting because it says a client's perspective. I consider ourselves as the end user. The client, depending on what authority you deal with. I think a lot of clients could just be the council themselves. However, as a school, I think it is vitally important that they get feedback on what we perceive to be good, bad, and ugly about any development. And so, although we're not the client in this situation, you can tell that the county council were authority were. It does come down to the fact that we are the users, we're the ones that work in there, we're the ones that are having to live and to cope with the building. And as we go through this presentation, you'll see that what we've achieved with the authority has been phenomenal. And I think we can say that safely for all of the schools that have gone up within the authority in the last 2 years. Everyone has been a learning curve, but we are very lucky in the Talbot in the fact that we do get a higher level of input into the decisions in terms of design, and also that we're not in one of those authorities that you'll just say, like, here's your school, and then just pass it over. So I applaud the Talbot for that. A little bit about myself. When I was a little baby like that, I wanted to be a train driver. And I'm still thinking now, do I want to be a train driver? I don't know. I was brought up in Suffolk, not far from Norwich, where Mr. Hook was born apparently. And I was me and my sister, my parents, my dad was a painter, my mum worked in a circuit board factory for Pi TVs. There was no expectation at all for me to do anything apart from work with my hands, which in some ways was really good. My dad and my mum taught me lots and lots of skills. So I was building stuff, I was carpentry, I was putting engines to bits. My mum taught me to cook, which I was a bit sexist, but she did. She also taught me to knit as well, which I haven't really found much use of. But then I went off to university, and I was the first in the family to go to university. And those skills that I learned as a kid, I think have sort of like stood me well in life. I'm quite a practical guy, and as a consequence, I then sort of went into teaching, and as part of that, I started off as a head of PE within Kevin Syson School. I worked in Kevin Syson Comp for 32 years, which is a long time to be in one school. I did a brief spell in Dufferin, but they didn't like me, so I had to go there. And then basically I became deputy head in the school. My areas of responsibility is curriculum design, timetable, which is that beautiful little array of colours, which I always think is the unknown and the unknown. Timetables always pretend that it's impossible, it can never be done, and they try to sort of say, it's one of those things that nobody understands. It's hard, but it's not that hard. But one of the things that did happen is when the school, we were given the green light from the authority that we were going to have a new build, the head at the time recognised that it was probably in the best interest to ask me to do the management of it from the school perspective because of my practical ability, the fact that I didn't sort of like manage the school from anybody that's really in terms of its sort of maintenance side of things. No, we have to click again, sorry. So the school was built in around about 1973, 74 when it first opened. It was a classic design, probably in its day, it was lovely. Over the years, it became tired, I think is the safest thing to say. There wasn't much scope for any DDA. We were on 3 levels. We had, of those 3 levels, we had about 7 different sub-levels. It was a nightmare. We couldn't get a wheelchair around the place. It was hard to even wheel a trolley around the school. The electrics were overused, so we were struggling with power distribution. It was riddled with asbestos. We couldn't really do much. However, it was a fab school. And okay, the building was tired, but the kids, the staff have always been really, really good. Even some funds that previous people. So,
just say that I went to school with that through my.
Well, we kept it safe, don't we? So it was a great school to be in, but it was in desperate need for a refurb or for a rebuild, as the case was with Kent South. Next slide, please. So this is a very sort of snapshot of what we've got now. The school was basically built, the new school was built on our fields. The PE department suffered for a few years because they didn't have any fields, but they coped. They've now got probably the best facilities within the authority for a school of that size. Once the school was built on the new site, we then moved into it, and then they had to demolish the old school and reinstate the playing fields, etc., down the bottom there. The contract, which I'll go into later, the contractors were amazing. We managed to get it finished before the summer holidays. We had this big decision that we were going to move everything lock, stock and barrel over the Whitsun half term, which was a 1 week holiday. There was a lot of people with raised eyebrows at the time saying you'll never do it, you'll never get it all done at that time. We did. It was a mammoth effort. The staff were amazing. We had Pickford did all the approvals for us, but we actually managed to get it. So my involvement in it was very simple. It started off with me, the head asked me to look at it and to lead it from the school's perspective. And I think the first thing that we did was when we had the agreement, because of my timetable and in my curriculum design side of things, I knew what I needed in terms of classrooms. Now, I had learned some tricks over the years in that anybody is here from the SIP team or from anything from the finance team, I asked for more than what I needed. And so, for example, we asked for additional spaces, thinking that, all right, if we don't chance an arm, then it's not worth it. I think that's sort of like a good, well, from my perspective, it's good. From the authorities' perspective, it wasn't so good. And I'm sure that there were things that because I asked for more, they said, yeah, you can have that, but you're not having that instead. So there were swings and roundabouts. So my first, you can see the circle at the top there, I sat down with a spreadsheet, looked at my timetable, looked at what I thought my timetable was going to be like in a couple of years' time, and I thought made a schedule of this is what I need. These are the classrooms I need to be able to run a school of 900 people, which is what we were. But at the time we were down about 700 at the time, but we knew that the demographics were going to actually push us up to 900. Plus, also with the new school, you'd also have more pupils coming in through because of the sort of like the newness of the place. Then we went on, I was presented, I had a meeting with the authority, the architects team, and they were amazing. They just said, right, okay, you need to read this document, which is BB98, which I read, and I sort of went through and I started to fill it into on the back of a fag packet design, went into BB98 and we started that. So that was realistically designing the design brief, the tender. There was a lot of support for that from the authority and from the SIP team and also from the architects department as well. And basically that was just sort of like outlining what we needed for the school so that the authority could then go away and start to do the tender process properly. When they started doing the tender process, I thought, oh, my job's over now, they don't need me anymore. They didn't, there was a, I won't say a lack of communication, but there was very little communication. And looking back on it now, I can understand why. Because the tendering process is something that I would never ever want to get involved in, right? Because it is a legal sort of wrangle that's got all the everything that goes with it. I just didn't want to know about it. And still now, I think it's a minefield. So that was our initial. That was my first phase of actually the design phase. It then came that we had, the tender was won by Morgan Sindall. It was a design and build project. The architects were Powell Dobson. And this is when we started to be re-engaged with the authority. We started to re-engage after a couple of months of sort of like everything went quiet, then it all started to take off again. The biggest sort of side of that thing was that phase was that we had to look to see whether rooming allocation was done as to what we wanted. We did say that we wanted there were specifics that we felt that were important for Kevin's house, and that was, for example, that we wanted a community use school. That was one of the big things. It always has been a community use school with the sports facilities in the old place, but we wanted it more so in the new school. We also wanted the ALN and welfare parts of the school central. We didn't want them stuck out on the limb. So that was a key part as well. And with the negotiation with ourselves, with the authority, and with Powell Dobson, we achieved that one. There were quite a few sort of rethinks on circulation spaces and dining areas. That one was a big area, sort of area of concern that we had to keep going back and saying, no, we need to have a bigger area, we need more space. And every time I asked for more space, it meant that somebody else or something else had to go. Right? Because I understand that there is a finite budget on the build, and we can't just say, yeah, we want this, we want this, we want that. And that was quite difficult to try and sort of grasp, but in the end, I think I worked out bargaining powers, and we worked out how we could get certain things done, because I learned in the end to go in and say, right, we'd like to have this, however, we don't mind losing that, there's something. So the overall sort of plan of it, as you can see there now, was superb. It took a fair amount of toing and throwing. One of the things I was frustrated about was the fact that if I wanted to make a change, it would be, there was a communication sort of network where it went from the school to the authority, from the authority to Morgan Sindall, from Morgan Sindall to Dobson Powell, from Dobson Powell back to Morgan Sindall, back to the authority, back to me. That took time. And I wish in some ways there would have been a more sort of cohesive sort of like method to actually take that. Okay, next slide, please. So those were the main players within our build. These are the people that I was really sort of like working with for the majority of the time. Obviously the authority had the sort of like, they were the key holders, they were the stakeholders really. They were the ones that said yay or nay to whatever. And they were really good in terms of listening to what we wanted. What we asked for had a good reasoning behind it. It wasn't just sort of like on a whim. Some things were on a whim, but they were, between us, we managed to sort of like, no, that's not going to happen. Morgan Sindall were fantastic. I say that, I've never worked with Bouygues or with Kia or anybody else like that. But in terms of their commitment to the project, in terms of their understanding of what we wanted, in terms of what they provided for us, was phenomenal. The collaboration, consultation was fine, everything was great, but that communication was a little bit hit and miss, because at some point during the construction phase we had COVID, and we worked all the way through COVID with this project. And I take my hat off to everybody who was involved in this, in terms of supply chain, in terms of construction, in terms of architecture. It wasn't a barrier. There were times where it's a bit sketchy, like, will we get the steel in? Will we get this? Will we get that? But it was amazing. It just seemed to flow. In fact, in some ways, I think there were possibly advantages to it, because there was lead. We weren't on site for a lot of the time. So, for example, when the rule came in about social distancing in canteen areas, Morgan Sindall were really up against it, because they were then going to have to think about possibly throwing in a sort of like, God knows how many thousands of pounds to actually provide extra canteen facilities. There was no need. I've got an empty canteen here, no kids are in school, you can have that. And that worked really well for us. So there were benefits. We worked with Morgan Sindall worked with us. things were ticking along nicely, and then all of a sudden, somebody came in and mentioned this word FFE, and that that really was when they started to work hard, because that was the stage where, as I said, that was that bit in the middle was a snapshot out of my diary at the time to type meetings, and more meetings. That's all we were doing. It was horrendous. It was intense. With the FFE package, it was really, really hard work. We had all the drawings through from Powell Dobson. We then had to sit down with individual departments and work through what was actually appropriate and what we wanted in the classrooms. The shape of the school was all done. That was going out. The steel had been poured. The steel was, the floors had been poured. Everything else was okay. But it was this sort of like FFE, sort of like, oh dear. We had another problem in the fact that we had two suppliers of FFE. We had our fixed furniture, so for units and etc. was with Sangren. Ooh, sorry, I was supposed to mention that. And then we had the very lovely ministry furniture, which was fab. Obviously, I wouldn't say that because, but all jokes aside, they were great. They held my hand through a lot of it and sort of said, well, this is good, this is not good. The meetings were for an English, for a maths classroom, easy. Right, you just got 32 chairs and you've got 16 tables, and you've got a teaching wall. And the teaching wall was already designed and built because other schools had used it with authority, and that was fantastic. You know, a lot of staff were like, oh, you can imagine from the old school where they all had these little nooks and crannies and little cupboards where they could store all of their belongings, which they kept in these rooms. Some of them we could actually carve and date them back to about 1970. And there were documents in there from 1970, but they might still be using them. So we had to educate the teachers to actually say, no, you're going to have to bin a lot of this stuff because you haven't touched it for 30 years, so why are you going to keep it now? You're not using it. So that was quite a difficult sort of thing. But the biggest issue was, well, we can't survive without a huge cupboard. Well, you can, and they do, and they did. That was quite, you know, the teaching wall side of things was important. The meetings that we had were more with the technical departments. So, for example, science, technology, art, music, PE, right? Those departments were the ones that took up the time. As I said, humanities in terms of their classrooms or in terms of English and maths, they're just straightforward rooms with tables and chairs and teaching. But the other ones took a lot of time. That was hard work. However, it was essential because if we didn't get that right, that's the fabric of the school. That's the bit that makes it actually work. So this is just some example of some of the equipment that went in, which probably you see most of that is very similar to a lot of the schools in terms of new builds. But we did, if you click on the next one, we did come up with this, which we thought was important, which was wall art. School itself paid for that, which was, we did try and get it out of the sort of build capital, but that wasn't going to happen. So we ended up having to put our money out for that. But it just was hard work. I say it comes with a health warning. Some departments were awesome because we were left to design that with the assistance of Ministry of Furniture. They had a graphics team support. But that was some departments were awesome. Obviously, art, higher graphics team. Sorry, art were phenomenal. Music was phenomenal. IT was phenomenal, but then other departments, in case like they got no creative ability whatsoever. So it was down to these poor guys at the back here to try and drag something out of them. So although it looks good, it's multi-purpose, it signposts, it breaks up the monotony of just the standard wall colour, and it also is educational. So it was well worth it. Right, hidden challenges. I'm going to have to refer to my notes for this. There's this one. Right. What I've said is that throughout the whole design process, we got there, we got an excellent school in the end. It's an amazing school. I personally think it's the best school I've ever seen. If you ever want to go up and have a look, then please contact me. The views themselves are phenomenal, right? Because it is perched right on the top of the hill. We look over the Avonmouth Glen area, and we also look over the Leith itself. So it is a stunning school from that perspective. But inside as well, it's the value of it comes from the fact that there's so much natural light coming in, which is a credit to the architects team that designed it. It's flooded with natural light. There is very little. You don't need light on it. It's amazing. And I think that in itself has given the school and the pupils and the staff sort of a huge sense of well-being. It just makes them relax, it makes them calm. It's a very calm environment for people to work in, for staff to work in, for anybody to go into. And there are other things as well, the flow of the school as well. There's no dead ends, obviously. There's everything works in a nice circular area. Because of COVID, we had to still maintain social distancing. We had to work with children in pods so that we could still do that in that school, in the new school, but also in the old school. The old school was a nightmare in terms of trying to socially distance children. In this school, we could actually contain them, we could have their own areas, etc. I put there that no school has got the same needs. So we're coming away from Kevin Syson now, we're looking at sort of like the philosophy behind Welsh Assembly and things like that in terms of the build. Now, we work on the secondary school, BB98, and I'll come back to that, but when we're looking at sort of like trying to achieve excellence in the school, we have to think what is the purpose of that school? Now, some schools have got, from an educational perspective, got more of a line on sort of the classes, traditional academia, whereas other schools have got more of a line in terms of technological excellence. And it's going to depend on where your children come from, what the expectations of that area are, what the availability of jobs are in that area. So some of the Leith and suburb schools would stay away from the text and those sort of qualifications, whereas we were enhanced and we were developed and sort of trying to encourage that side of things. And then looking at the pastoral side of the school, that is massive now, and that's something that I think that we really, as all educationists, need to start. Well, we are looking at. I don't think we have to. It's been put upon us. Whether it's COVID, whether it's society, whether it's social media, I don't know. Whether it's awareness of different situations, I'm not too sure. But the function and the purpose of the school is changing dramatically, and I think post-COVID is going to really become more apparent. So, the trends, well-being, student needs, etc., in terms of considerations, these are things that I think are we've got to be careful that we don't jump on a bandwagon and start to say, well, we need to have this because this is trendy at the moment. Because in another 5 years' time, that trend might disappear. So, for example, we've got now with the pedagogy in terms of teaching and learning, we have our areas of learning. So we've got the humanities, we've got health and well-being. Now, as I've been around for a fair few years, I can remember them when I first started teaching. They weren't called areas of learning, they were called faculties. And I think, you know, it is enhanced, it is better, but it's still along the same sort of line as things. Yeah, you know, a few years ago, I think in primaries, correct me if I'm wrong, but they were quite keen on having open plan classrooms. I don't know whether or not those open plan classrooms have still got the same desire as what they have nowadays. So again, being aware of trends is one of the things. People needs changing. I think we are, as I said, alluded to earlier, we're more aware of what is needed and what people's need and what staff need in terms of the provision within school. there is a great diagnosis of specific needs in terms of children's education. So therefore, as a consequence of that, I think that the facilities and the provision in terms of school needs to accommodate that. An example being special considerations in examinations. 15 years ago, there would probably be about 10 pupils in a year group that had special considerations. And that's a year group of 150. Nowadays, there's probably 50 kids in a year group of 150 in special considerations. Those children can't sit in a main examination hall and sit normal exams. They have to have additional time, they have to have a bespoke facility, they have to have a scribe, etc. So all of those sort of things affect what we do with our spaces in schools, how we manage them, how we actually put them in place. ITC provision, ICT provision, sorry, it's not right. When we built the school, when we designed the school, when we first started off with BB98, I said, oh, we need 4 IT rooms. 2 of them were going to be dedicated IT rooms, 2 of them were going to be sort of bookable IT rooms, because that's what we realized from our previous timetable, from our previous school, is what we needed. Because the history department might want to do an IT lesson, therefore they want to go into an IT room, they need to be able to book it. Since COVID, we don't need IT rooms, because every child is given a Surface Pro or a Chromebook. So therefore, every room can now be an IT room. So the history department don't need to go to an IT room. They can simply just, children get your IT provision out and you can do it in the classroom. So IT provision has changed dramatically. So again, because of COVID, I think whether or not funding exists for that in terms of future years, for the next 5-10 years, are all kids still going to have Chromebooks? I don't know. But at the moment, that's the situation. Right, one of the other sort of areas that I'm concerned with versatility of spaces. We've got a great big hall, which is beautiful, which we could use for assemblies. We could use it for productions, we can use it for any other events. It's hugely underutilized. It's only used once a day for assemblies. And that's only used for 20 minutes. So that's a massive space within a school. I'm wondering, how can we get around, how do we redesign or reuse those areas or make them multifunctional? Because it's got to be done, because the cost of that hall alone is probably the cost of probably the canopy that I lost or something else. So, you know, we've got to look at how we can actually get those things across. Within Kevin Syson, we had what's called the SENC, which is a Secondary Education Nurture Centre, which is a school, it's a unit within the school, which is for children that are in jeopardy of being permanently excluded from their host school. So they would come to SENC, and then the process should be that they're reintegrated and they get sort of like prepared to go back into their original school. That's quite an extreme level. We also have within our school in Kevin Syson, we have what's called a PIC, which is Pupil Inclusion Centre. And the PIC is for the children that are causing short-term temporary problems in the classroom. They're being annoying, they're being nuisance or what have you. And for whatever reason they're behind it, they need to be helped. Now, our PIC is done in the YMCA. So we send children if they are in charge, you know, instead of being excluded for a day because they've done something wrong, they go down to the PIC rather than having it. So they still get education, although it's not in the main sort of like form of the school. I think a lot of schools are looking towards that. So rather than having the YMCA or something like that, the PRUs out there are full. They can't fit anymore. They are chocolate. So I think that for the sort of low level disruption in schools, a lot of schools are going to go to this model. So therefore, do we need to be bringing that into the new designs of new schools? It just basically takes space. And if it's taking space, we're going to look at how we get that space. Future-proofing schools, you know, it'd be lovely to have a crystal ball, you know. So we just have to have a very educated guess at what we can build and how we can sort of cope with if there's a future outbreak of COVID or if there's something similar to that, how to manage that within the school. And again, it's something that we need to be aware of because it could happen. And then the last thing I'd like to say is just the role of the school. It's not just for education. We are providing more and more support services, whether it's counselling, whether it's medical within schools. And I wonder whether or not the school in the next 10 years is going to be just, it's a school for education. It isn't a school for education now. It's a school for a lot more things in terms of community support, etc. But I wonder whether or not, does a school actually have to have provision within it for those services? So do we have social services integrated within the school? Do we have health or health integrated within the school? All of those, again, is going to be a demand on space. And that space, if it's going to be a lack of a teaching room, then we won't be able to deliver curriculum. And I wonder, the final thing, I wonder whether or not EV98, EV99 needs to have a little bit of tweaking done to it. Because at the moment, it's based on pre-COVID, it was was it 91? 99. So we're working off a model that was quite old. And I just wonder whether or not, or we talk about 21st century schools, do we need to actually bring that on board and we need to look at that? If anybody wants to employ me to do that, I'd be more than happy. Thank you very much.